What you've said so far, it can make someone, if it's correct, if it's sound, it can make someone doubt Islam, but it wouldn't necessarily lead someone to be an atheist. So let's first deal with the question of atheism. Why are you an atheist?
Because I think that there's 4,000 there's too many religions out there, and I think Islam was like man-made, and the universe is like too big and it's forever expanding, that there's no way other planets would have Islam as well, or other like, you know, like I feel like it's man-made and there's too many religions, and yeah, that's like one of the reasons.
Okay, so again,
also evolution.
Yeah, again, that would undermine religion, but not the general idea of God. These are two different things.
Okay, yeah.
So why would you subscribe to atheism and not agnosticism or theism of some sort?
It's kind of like I'm atheist, but at the same time I'm agnostic. Like it's a bit of a mix of both. Like I know that it's not one of the out of the 4,000 religions, it's none of the 4,000 religions, but it is something like that no one knows, no human being knows.
Okay,
like,
in that case, you would still not be an atheist.
I mean, atheism means that you don't believe in like God. So like the idea of God, I don't believe in it.
Okay,
but, like,
good.
It could be anything.
Okay, so let's start there. Let's start there.
Yeah.
Before we look into whether religion is true or not, whether Islam is true or not, or certain injunctions in Islam are fair or not, we start off right at the top. If there's a God, how do you think this universe came about? This world came about?
I think it's a tough question, but like it's probability as well, because the universe is like there's millions and millions and millions and millions of galaxies. Obviously, one of these galaxies would have the right conditions to like sustain life. We aren't the only living organisms on Earth. Like there's definitely more life outside of Earth, and we're just lucky enough like to have, like this area has the conditions for it to be, you know.
Yeah. So essentially, what you're saying is we shouldn't be surprised to be alive because we are alive there, and we are surprised because we're alive. There is bound to be some part of the universe, or maybe there's multiple universes, and one of them has life-sustaining properties.
Of course.
Essentially, this is known as the anthropic principle,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
That in no way, shape, or form argues for atheism.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
So the point that you made is not your point is a point of, say, acknowledging our existence.
Yeah.
It's not a point which steers one towards atheism.
Okay. But do you believe that other life got the Islam as well? Quran and the
So there's two different things here.
Like
Even if I wasn't Muslim,
Yeah.
I would still believe there's life in other parts of the universe. But because I'm Muslim, I also do believe there's life in other parts of the universe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you see what I'm saying? Like
No,
that,
so look, let me
they
just.
wouldn't get the Quran too. Like another being, another planet wouldn't have.
Okay, so again, let's go back to this point.
Yeah.
We are only talking about God's existence for now. And then we will go into why didn't the aliens get the Quran, or why is it that people born in India are most likely to be Hindu, people born in, say, China, and we can get to that later. Just the existence of God.
Yeah. Just like
Let's look at what we agree about existence right now. The world, biological living systems that we are, and the way that we experience consciousness, and the way that there is design all around us. How would you explain this design? I would explain it through God. How would you explain it?
I can't, like, as in, like, the only difference between us and animals is our intelligence and our consciousness. And our consciousness gives us, like, this ego that, like, our life is more important and we are more superior than other life forms, you know? So, in reality, we're not more important than other animals as well. We are all, like, breathing the same life.
Right.
Like, as in, like, one life. And the only reason that we think there is a God or we think we're special or there has to be an importance is because of our consciousness and ego. And like,
Okay, so firstly, I disagree with you. Animals do have consciousness.
okay.
Animals also have intelligence.
But they don't have intelligence as like obviously as us.
Our intelligence is at a higher cognitive level. I agree with that. But there's a gradient of intelligence that you can see a sort of trajectory with animals, right?
Yeah.
Organisms like us, even ants have very complex social structures. How does any of this point towards atheism, though? It doesn't.
It points that it's not like in terms of like that we created the idea of God. Like, do you think that animals believe in God or like they have something like that? It's because of our intelligence that we think that we're more important and that we need meaning. That's the point of like leading.
Okay, so
God.
what you're pointing towards is a motivation someone has
like
to argue for God, but I'm not talking about the motivation, because someone may have a motivation. I don't want to live my life in a way that's restricted, therefore I don't want to believe in God.
Okay, so you just want to know like.
I just want to stick to facts, okay? So say something like the human brain, right?
Yeah.
The human brain, in terms of its anatomy, in terms of its function, in terms of memory recalling, and let's say even the DNA that we actually have that creates the brain, all of these things are more sophisticated than any computer code in the world.
So it couldn't be like probability that it just happened like randomly. Like,
okay, if somebody, if somebody was to say that, then they would need to justify. Because probabilities aren't just abstract. You have to justify what is the probability based on. Now we have two scenarios in front of us. In your life, are you going to take a scenario that's more probable or less probable? The way that you operate, more probable. Okay. So there's two scenarios here. Human life was designed. Human life was not designed. There's only two scenarios. Which is more probable?
Not like it's not designed, like as in like it was just probability, just randomly.
As in it was just we naturally well, not just evolution, but naturalistic interpretation of evolution.
The Adam and Eve thing, if that's what you're saying, that like
you see Adam and Eve comes much later.
Punished and then, because that's what it says in like kind of right.
So let's stick to Darwin's perspective just for the sake of argument. So Darwin believed that there was an initial cell, and all life came through that cell.
Okay.
And when he published his theory in 1858 at the Royal Society, before he published his book, he believed in God. And even when he died, he was not an atheist. He was never an atheist. Yeah. So you can
what religion did he believe in then?
He was initially a Christian, then he became a deist. A deist is someone who believes in God but doesn't believe in religion. So by the time he published his book, he was a deist, he was no longer a Christian. Later on in life, he became an agnostic, but he was never an atheist. The interesting thing is, when he did publish The Origin of Species, he believed in God. And throughout his life, he kept correspondence with other theists like Asa Gray, who's also a biologist. So there's nothing inherent in evolutionary theory that will lead you to atheism.
Everything that like evolution goes against the Adam and Eve story,
yes.
Everything he studied and researched goes completely against
Yeah, but remember I said we're going to take one step at a time.
Yeah.
So it doesn't go against God.
Okay, the idea of God.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Unless someone comes up with a naturalistic...
Okay, so who made God then?
Okay.
In general, like,
okay, God is uncreated.
He was just there.
God is uncreated. Now, let me just explain something about this. When we look at life, we can infer there's a designer. Now, someone may say, where did the designer come from? There's two answers to this. The designer was uncreated or the designer was created. Either way, the inference from design to designer is unfazed by the question who designed the designer. Do you understand the logic here?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay, so let me just go slowly.
Yeah.
We have DNA. DNA, we infer from DNA, which is irreducibly complex, which is specified complexity.
Yeah.
We infer from this, there is a designer. Now someone says, was this designer eternal or temporal? The answer to the attribute of the designer is irrelevant to this inference. The inference takes you to a designer. Okay. So far, do you agree that behind the design of life, there is a designer?
There is some, obviously there's like trillions and trillions of like functions like in the human body that will make us like the way we are. So yes, possibly, but I lean towards like no, because of how grand everything is, like in terms of galaxies and universe and like in general. Like it could be probably. It's like a 50-50 maybe.
Okay, you're saying 50-50. I would not say it's 50-50. I would say purely objectively, purely by probabilities, it's going to be 99.999% and something very, very low on the other side, okay? Let's just look at one small thing. When you're looking around in this park, right, do you ever get this headache and this sign in front of you that your memory is full? You don't. When you do that with a mobile phone, does that happen?
Yes. Yeah.
Right, it does happen. Okay. Can you remember where you first went to school?
Yes.
Okay, how many years ago was that?
Like 23, 22 years. Like
Okay, do you remember the classroom you were in?
a little bit.
Okay.
It's fuzzy. Yeah.
So this human mind, which is scanning and recording everything, is more sophisticated than any technology that humans have come up with. It's so complex that the biologist who discovered the structure of DNA, Francis Crick, he was an atheist and he couldn't explain this complexity that he saw, so he said it might have come from aliens. This is in his book Life Itself. That's how complicated life is. We are using the same inference that he's using for aliens to say, no, let's not say aliens, let's just say a designer for now. We're not even saying God, we're just saying a designer.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
That inference will then open up for us other avenues that we can look into.
Like who did it? Yeah.
Who did it? Is there a religion? And then when we look into religions, why is Islam true? Because I think, Ahmed, you sound like a very sincere person. My advice to you is separate the question of God and religion. First come to a conclusion whether there is a God or not, then look into what religion is right or what religion is actually wrong.
Right,
yeah.
wrong, yeah.
So let's just stick to God.
Okay.
What other objections do you have to God's existence?
Excuse me.
Yeah, let me just speak to him, please, first. Yeah.
God, we see there is God exists.
I think the what's it called? How everything is like built to kill you in terms of survival. If we didn't have houses, if we didn't like fend for ourselves, it's also cruel. As in even the things that are happening in Palestine, let's say. Even like you know how people say that God has a plan for everyone. So let's say there's a little girl that got like, let's say, I know it's a bit like harsh, like let's say she was raped by like 4 or 5 guys and stuff like. What was her like path? What was her plan? You know, like it's all a bit like so cruel. And like if we didn't like fend for ourselves and made all this for ourselves, everything would kill us. There is no miracle things that is like saving. It's all us. We're making it happen. We're like surviving. We're the ones doing it. So everything is like cruel.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
There's a lot of
It's as if there's no one there to like guide
Okay.
us. You know, like, or
So
help us out.
what's the alternative?
The alternative of that.
Life being a cosmic disco party, everyone's happy, everyone lives forever, no one's sick, no one rapes each other, no one kills each other.
As in like there'd be rules, like there'd be like, yeah, not something like that. Something a bit of a balance of that. Like if something really cool is like extreme is happening, maybe there would be an intervention. If the God was
sure.
If the God
So
was,
when we
like,
have these,
actually, like,
sure, when we have these, so you're talking about, for example, what's happening in Palestine. When we have these people in Palestine whose children have been killed, they're under rubble, they're starving, they're cold, they're going through all of this, they're still saying amantu billah, we believe in God. Their paradigm is not your paradigm. Their paradigm is that God did not create this world to be a cosmic disco party. Their paradigm is that God created this world for a testing ground, and we are all being tested with good and evil.
But what's their test? The girl that got, let's say a little girl gets raped by 4 guys, 5 guys, like in Pakistan or in Palestine.
That is the test.
Like,
that is the test. That is the test for, in fact, not just her, the entire society. In the Quran, it mentions that girls were being buried alive because they were not favored by the pagans at the time. They were burying women alive. And that's crime is something society is responsible for. So look, the Quranic perspective is that evil and good exists in this world. It doesn't say evil doesn't exist. It doesn't say you will not be tested. In fact, what we are taught is that the most beloved to God are tested even more. But the point I'm trying to point out, and this sounds really, really objective, I want you to think about this. Say we go down to the London Tower. I show you a medieval torture rack.
Okay. Yeah.
It's the way that they tortured people for, I don't know, throwing an apple at the Queen or something stupid like that. Would you say that medieval torture rack is not designed because it's doing a function as evil?
No, of course I'd say that. Yeah.
Exactly. So just because something has an evil outcome does not undermine the idea of design. Design is irresistible as a conclusion. Design is still there. So then the wider questions of why is there suffering, why is there pain, these questions, they need theological answers, but they don't undermine the idea of design. Now, have you read the story of Moses in chapter 18 of the Quran?
I'm familiar with his story. Like, but I'm not like no.
So Musa, we say Musa, right? The Prophet Moses, he was traveling with this man whose name was Khidr. Are you familiar with this story?
No.
Okay, so what happened was Moses was being taught a lesson by God, so he met this figure called Al-Khidr. Now some people say Al-Khidr was an angel, or they have all these theories about him. So anyway, what we know is that they were traveling together, and when they were traveling together, some strange occurrences happened, and Moses was supposed to learn a lesson from Khidr. What Khidr said to him is, you will not be able to be patient with what you're going to see. So when they were traveling, they came across a group of people and they helped them cross a river. And this good group of people, Samaritans or whatever type of people they were, friendly people, Khidr made a hole in the boat. He damaged the boat. And Moses said, why did you do that? And Khidr said, didn't I say to you, you're not supposed to question me? Then they went along. When they went along, another occurrence happened. The second one slipped my mind.
It was, they went to a town.
A town, yes. They went to a town, and in this town, and in the ancient times, when you go to a town, it's not like today everyone's ignoring you. There's a house you can stay in, you can be someone's guest. The Arabs had this...
Sorry, no, in between it was
the boy.
The boy.
Okay. So there was a boy, and Khidr killed him. An innocent boy, he killed him. And Moses said, why did you kill an innocent child? Then Khidr again said to him, didn't I tell you not to question me? Then they went to another place. And in this place, there was a town and the people rejected them. They didn't give them hospitality. And as they were walking out, this hostile town, there was a wall that was damaged, and Khidr rebuilt the wall. He rebuilt it. So let's look back to the people of the boat who were good people, something bad happened. To the innocent child, something bad happened. To people that weren't good, something good was happening. So again, Moses said, well, if you wanted, you could have charged money for that. Like, why are you doing this for free? So Khidr said to him, this is where we basically end our journey, right? This is where we end. He now is explaining to Moses what is the interpretation of these particular events that he couldn't be patient with. So he said to him, there was a king that was seizing all the good boats that were along this river. I damaged the boat, and obviously if you damage it, they can repair it later, but the king is not going to seize it because it's not operational. So that's the first event. The second event was that child was going to be tyrannical. That child was going to be raised up and do something evil.
How would he know that?
So again, this is the story. So this is where Al-Khidr is not me or you. We can't go around doing stuff like this, right?
Of course. Yeah.
This was a story. This is why some people say it was an angel. It was a story to show that when something evil happens, there may be something good behind it. And when it came to the townspeople, that area belonged to, the area that he repaired belonged to some orphans whose father was righteous, and God intended that their treasure is not uncovered by the wall that had broken down. So Khidr was doing something good to a people that was supposedly bad to help people that were good. So the Quranic paradigm is that behind evil, behind suffering, there is a purpose, there is a test, there is a trial. It is not as simple as, because there's evil, there's no God. So Islamic theology has an answer to these things. And what I'd recommend you do, take everything one step at a time. Your initial question was very interesting, because this is something I used to think about. When I was in my early 20s, I used to think, it's not fair that someone born in Latin America, in an Amazonian rainforest, they are born, they never hear of Islam, they die, they go to hellfire. I used to think, that can't be right. That's not just. When I looked into Islamic theology doesn't say somebody born in the Amazon who's never heard of Islam and they die, they go to hellfire. Islamic theology doesn't say that. Islamic theology says that you are questioned according to the knowledge that you have. So someone that has not received the message of Islam is not the same as someone that has received the message of Islam. These are two different things. Secondly, when it comes to there being many, many, many religions, I had the same question. Why are there so many religions? Now, there's two possibilities here. Because there's so many religions, they're all wrong. That's one possibility.
One is right.
The first possibility is they're all wrong.
Okay.
The second possibility is some of them are right. The third possibility is one of them is right.
One of them, yeah.
Okay? Either one is right, all wrong, a few are right, the rest wrong, or all wrong. The point that came to my mind is, if there is a true religion, then it has to be a religion that God has sent throughout mankind, throughout humanity. The religion of Islam has always existed on earth. Ancient Christianity, ancient Judaism, even ancient religions like Zoroastrianism and Hinduism, and even the Aztecs, the Mayans and the Incas, they all had monotheistic people coming and teaching them about the oneness of God. So the basic common denominator in all these religions is that they initially believed in one supreme God. And later on they deviated. And we find this in the Quran. We find that God sends a messenger to every nation. Do you know how many messengers there are? How many prophets there are?
No, not the top of my head.
Prophets, over 100,000. I think it's 125.
Yeah,
I don't remember the exact number, but it's a huge number. Messengers, how many? It's supposed to be, again, an enormous number. So God will never take someone to account if they haven't received the message. And he says, God promises in the Quran he's not unjust. He promises in the Quran he doesn't punish until he sends a messenger, and everyone's accountable for what they know.
And those
You
that don't
see?
receive the message will be tested in the hereafter.
Yeah, and people will be tested in the hereafter. So the questions that you're asking, Ahmed, I think are brilliant questions, but they require patience. They don't require sound bites. You know, these atheists, they come up with sound bites. Religion's irrational, too many religions, therefore they're all false.
Yeah.
It's more sophisticated than that.
And okay, last question. What are your thoughts on like atheism growing nowadays? Like, as in, like, it's with the growth of technology, with the growth of like actual like people like having more access to different like news and all that. Do you think that it has a link to it, like that, like people are like now realizing that, you know, like that there is no religion because like they're getting smarter and this and that.
Yeah, so this is the most common argument made by atheists. You find Richard Dawkins making this, Victor Stenger making this, Sam Harris, Neil deGrasse Tyson, they all say this. History shows us the opposite. Science is a venture which is 4,000 years old. Majority of the history of science, Muslims, Christians and others were involved who were theistic, not atheistic. Atheists have come right at the fag end of the scientific enterprise and are claiming science is theirs. Even today, the vast majority of scientists are people that you cannot say are atheistic. Even if they were, even if we had to make the argument, if the majority follow atheism, atheism's right, then the majority of the history of science were theists, so theism's right. Obviously, that's not a valid argument. Their argument is this: religion is based upon a gap in human knowledge. That science, the torch of science is making the darkness of ignorance disappear, and therefore the room for God to disappear. But actually, that's not what we believe. We believe science illuminates God's creation. Science teaches us, for example, that the genetic code is something far more sophisticated than anything Microsoft has developed.
Scientists and
Yeah.
But isn't the purpose of science to find new discoveries and keep finding out like the truth about the universe? But when Islam says that we have the final answer. This is how the universe is.
No, it's two different things.
What does
Yeah.
So like,
Islam encourages science. Science is an
but
explanation.
how? It's like contradictory because Islam says that this is it.
When does it
This
say
is the
that?
answer. As in, like, this
Okay,
is how, like, God-
so I'll explain to you. Certain things are categorical in Islam. There is a God, that's categorical. This is morality, that's categorical. Day of judgment is going to happen, that's categorical. How the universe was made. Should we pursue science? Should we look at astronomy and come up with explanations? Islam promotes this. I recommend to you a book. Patricia Farah has written a book called Science of 4,000 Year History. She covers the Islamic sciences in terms of why Muslims did science. And one of the things that she argues in that book is that the reasons why Muslims excelled in science is because their religious texts enforce in them inquiry to look into the cosmos. Because the Quran says, the Quran says, do you not see that how the camel is created? The Quran says, look into how we started creation, travel the earth. Do you not ponder about creation? So Islam doesn't say don't ponder. I'll give you a narration of the Prophet, peace be upon him, for you to understand. I'm paraphrasing. The Prophet taught us reflect upon creation, do not reflect upon Allah.
Okay. just
Meaning-
creation, yeah. Okay.
Allah is an entity which is so great, we can only understand very little things about Allah. But science and creation and these things, we can look into them. In fact, it's an Islamic duty to look into them. Have you heard of a man called Imam Ghazali? Imam Ghazali. He was an Islamic theologian going back, I think, about 1,000 years ago. He believed it was a religious duty to do science.
That's actually good to know because I didn't know that
Yeah.
they encouraged it.
It's often an atheist argument. That they go against science, or they're the bastions
Yeah.
of science.
Yeah, that's the main
and religion's
thing.
against
Yeah.
science, but usually we're concerned in the West. A lot of it's inherited from Christianity. In the past, within the Christian religion, science and scientists were persecuted. But then they blame that and project that to all religion. Islamic history is very different with science. The relationship is
And
very
behind
different.
that, Newton was a priest.
I'll give you one small piece of advice.
Or theologian.
He was
If you
a
believe
priest.
in God,
That's
not
why he
religion,
had time to-
just God,
to do
then
everything, to find
ask
everything
that
he
God
found.
for guidance
Theologian.
and research religion with an open heart. Open heart. Yeah. And what I'll do, where's it gone? This is my personal copy of the Quran. It's in English. You can have this as a gift. No, it's a gift to you.
Hijacking
Why?
science for themselves.
You can get. There's a whole bunch of them over there as well. But I'd like to gift it to you.
You know what? This was very good for me and everything, and this was I think the best explanations kind of. Like,
I hope
the points
so.
I've had. So thank you. Yeah.
No worries, no
It's a
worries.
pretty good debate.
Have a nice day.
Listen, open it randomly and open that randomly. Whenever you want, and let God.
Yeah, I will. Yeah. Okay. Thank you guys
Speak
so
to you
much.
later.
Are you guys sticking to, are you up to answer some more questions?
Sorry, I can't hear you.
Are you up to answer some more
Can you answer
questions?
more questions?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I'm his cousin. I'm Muslim, obviously, but I just have some questions about Islam. So, I think you probably get asked this often, but I've never had an explanation that makes sense to me. But in Surah Nisa, verse 34, when it says that men can strike their wives, I was just wondering an explanation that you have or an interpretation of that verse. Yeah, and why God had written that in the
Okay. When it comes to, for example, that particular verse, can you read it out, the whole verse?
in English. Yeah. So men are in charge of women by right.
Can I have some of your water if you don't mind?
For the other and what they spend on maintenance from their wealth. So righteous women will be obedient, guarding in the husband's absence, what Allah would have them do. But those wives from whom you fear arrogance, first advise them, then if they persist, forsake them in bed, and finally strike them. But if they obey you once more, seek no means against them. Indeed, Allah is ever exalted in praise.
Okay. Now, what would a feminist say to that?
Feminists, that men shouldn't beat their wives.
Yeah. Under any circumstances, they would say. Okay. And what does, if you look into the actual explanation of this verse, and you look into the explanation of what scholars say, they would say there are conditions in which a man is allowed to hit his wife, if this thing is followed. In 1400 years of Islamic history, this thing has been discussed. No one can deny this is in the Quran. Okay? Now, the most direct explanation that someone would give of this is, if a woman is involved in behavior that is XYZ, then so-and-so Islamic scholar has said that he's allowed to hit her with what's like a miswak or something, right? Any feminist would say this is misogynistic, this is wrong, this is not allowed. When you carry on reading Surah Nisa and you read the other verses and you read the other verses in the Quran about women, it will say a woman gets half the inheritance a man gets. This coupled with a woman getting half the inheritance that a man gets, again, what would they say? They would say Islam is a misogynistic religion, it's a patriarchal religion. When you combine that with the idea that in Islam a woman has to wear a hijab but a man doesn't, what would their answer to that be? That would be, again, this is oppressive. If we carry on along this, we can come across maybe 7, 8 things like this. I want to answer all of them in one go rather than one particular one. Islam says certain things which go against what men want and what women want. In both cases, the question that we have to ask is, why is Islam true? Because in Islam, one of the things which men love to do, for example, is business. You're not allowed to take interest. The most precious thing to wear is gold. Men are not allowed to wear it. When you're married, the man has to spend his wealth on the woman, but the woman can take her wealth and not spend it on the man. When it comes to silk, which is the best cloth, a man can't wear it, but a woman can. When there's a war going on, like there is in Ukraine, when there is a war and the Khalifa says you have to go to war, all the men have to fight, and if they die, they die, but the women don't have to fight.
Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off.
Yeah.
But like, I have no issue with believing that Islam is true. And so my specific question is just that interpretation of the verse. Like, are men actually allowed to beat their wives? Islam, is that okay?
Yeah. According to that verse, according to the interpretation for the last 1400 years, even the most liberal scholar will say that is something undeniable in the Quran. They will say even with a miswak, but no one will say that doesn't exist. No one will. And any Muslim that tries to sugarcoat it and say this verse doesn't mean that, they're going to do mental gymnastics and they're never going to come to a conclusion. The reason why I couple this with a whole bunch of other things is they're all related to fundamentally the question, is Islam true? Because what's worse, having to die and possibly be tortured by your enemies, or a man hitting his wife with a miswak? What's actually physically worse? Okay, no, sorry, let me just answer this. What's actually worse?
I mean, I just think those are very different circumstances that you can't, like...
No, okay, what situation would you rather be in? I'm just talking about in terms of unfairness, because the root cause of these questions is there's something unfair in the text. That's the root cause, right? But the same unfairness can be applied to the man who says, I have to go to beyond the enemy lines and fight and possibly be captured and tortured, which is far worse than being hit by a miswak. So in Islam...
But you said that's the most liberal interpretation, so what's the more strict one?
Okay.
General point he was trying to make.
I know, but I'm...
So what I mean by...
I understand your point, but I'm just saying...
What I mean by liberal is not woke liberalism, because woke liberals will say that that's metaphorical, it doesn't exist. What I mean is, no one can deny that that's in the Quran.
Yeah.
No one can deny that's in the Quran. No one can deny for 1400 years, Islamic scholars have said this rule exists. No one can deny that. That's what I actually meant. And the reason why I coupled this with a whole bunch of other things is to show there are things in Islam which cannot be rationalized unless you look into why Islam is true. Because you have a problem with this. Do you also have a problem with a woman getting half the inheritance that a man gets?
Well, I think that's different because, like, men are required to provide for their family. So that makes sense to me.
But that doesn't make sense to a whole bunch of other women.
Yeah, well, I'm, like, that, probably because they don't understand the larger context. But I don't know, like, to me...
Okay, let me ask you a question.
Like, that actually seems fair to me.
Okay.
Like, if men are required to provide for their family,
Okay, so let me ask you another way. If the Quran said that a woman, if her husband doesn't do X, Y, Z, and say the husband's involved in extramarital affairs, he does this or that, the woman's allowed to hit the husband, and the woman gets double the inheritance that a man gets, would you accept that that is right? If it says that in the Quran, if it's the other way around.
I mean, so I have no issue with accepting that that's right. That's what I'm like. I have no issue with accepting that's right. I'm just wondering, like, what that actually means.
Right, can I just...
Okay.
No, sorry. Let me just complete this point. The point I'm trying to get to, sister, is that the ultimate reason why any Muslim should accept those verses or any other verses is because they believe it's from God, not because they can rationalize it. Because there are many things in Islam which are rational but cannot be rationalized. Okay? So for example, in Islam, alcohol is not permitted. Interest is not permitted. We believe behind every ruling in Islam there's a rationale, there is a wisdom. Now you've come to terms with the idea that women get half the inheritance of men because you've discovered the wisdom of it, or you believe in the wisdom of it. In Islam, Allah tells us behind everything that He legislates there is a wisdom. Sometimes we have access to the wisdom, sometimes we don't have access to the wisdom. The point is we have to submit if we believe Islam to be true. Certain things cannot be rationalized. Sorry, let me just finish this conversation first. The point I'm trying to get to is certain things in Islam cannot be rationalized. You have to go back into why Islam is true.
Okay. Yeah. I get all of that. I'm just wondering specifically about that verse, like how, like you said, the most liberal interpretation is like, okay, like men can beat their wives in miswak, but like, how extreme does it go? Like, how much can they beat their wives and have it be? Oh, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, sister, listen. Look, look, what do you mean meant by even the most liberal interpretation is that you can't deny it, and Suboor is very unapologetic about it.
Yes.
We're not trying to sugarcoat it and say, oh, look, it doesn't really exist or this or that. But you know, there's some context here. I understand what you're saying. That you're a Muslim, you believe in Islam, you understand why. And Suboor pointed out there are wisdoms behind certain things, and there's contexts that we don't fully always understand. Let me just add one thing to this. The context around even these verses being revealed. The Arabs before that used to beat their wives without mercy. Initially, it was forbidden, totally. And what happened was that because it went totally 180, then a lot of the people complained that...
How did it go totally 180?
By saying, first they used to... Look, you have to understand, women's rights didn't exist before in Islam, before Islam came along, right? Even in inheritance. You know when Muslim women were allowed to inherit half, a lot of people mocked Muslims. A lot of people mock Muslims. Oh, you're giving your women inheritance rights, things like that, right? With the beating verse, I want to be very specific and address this very specifically. Initially, the Arabs would beat their wives very aggressively, mercilessly, and Islam came and said, no, that's wrong. But what happened is in a society that's so used to that, where the men were so dominant in that way, that a lot of people complained, hang on a minute, the women are going the other extreme now, they're taking full advantage and they're not able to manage and govern and so on. So when these verses came in, it came as a way to moderate. And when the beating of the miswak means that it's something so small and meaningless, it reduced it down, but there's always a threat there, or some sort of threat. Like slavery. Islam doesn't say it's good, right? But it didn't outlaw it straight away. What happened? It discouraged it. And over time, what happened? It went, right? So there are certain wisdoms in the way that Islam came about. It's very practical.
Yeah.
Even with alcohol, it was phased over time. This is just just to finish this point, that this is the context of where these verses came about. You have to remember, look in history, why these verses were revealed, in what context were they revealed. Even now, in a lot of societies, we spend a lot of time just now debating a guy who was promoting matriarchy and how women are on top and men should be subservient to them. But all of these things, if you think about it, in most cultures, and most of the cultures we come from as well, you as women would not respect a man unless he's a man. So there's a lot of different contexts to speak about, and these verses were revealed in that particular context.
And I want you to add something. The one who the Quran was revealed to understood it better than anyone, which is the Prophet. How many times did he beat his wives? Never. And the Prophet, peace be upon him, said, the best of you are the best to their wives. Why was the criteria to be the best human being, the best to your wife? Because you can act really nice in front of society, you can act really nice in front of your friends and family, but your real character is only known by your spouse. So Islam doesn't say wife beating's good and do it. This particular verse is for extreme circumstances. The Prophet, peace be upon him, never did it. And the Prophet, peace be upon him, when he had a woman come to him and the woman wanted to inquire about marriage proposals that she had, the Prophet discouraged her from marrying this guy because he was stingy, this guy because he's a wife beater. So Islam doesn't encourage wife beating. Islam doesn't encourage violence against women. this particular verse has to be understood in that context. And the way I see it is, this particular verse, for most women, I think for most men, even liberal men, not men in the past, but liberal men today, it cannot be rationalized. It simply has to be accepted if they go back to where it came from and they look at the context of it. Because there's many things in Islam, sisters, not just this. There's many things in Islam which can make someone leave Islam unless they go back to why Islam is true. So I'll tell you the story of one of my friends. One of my friends converted to Islam and he came from an egalitarian background, a liberal background. He found out that in Islam a woman cannot seek divorce. She can only get khula. She can't say talaq, talaq, talaq and get rid of her husband like the man can. There's an asymmetry there. And what happened was, this made him doubt Islam because he's a convert and he was brought up in a liberal feministic sort of way. After marriage, he discovered, actually, I see a wisdom behind this. Whatever wisdom he discovered, he discovered. So sometimes these things are tests from Allah. They actually test from Allah to see whether we believe. And this is why the question always goes back to, why is Islam true? What did I do with the guy who's here before you? I'm not interested in all the questions that he has. I'm interested in showing him why God exists and why Quran is true. Because once we can know that Islam is true, it answers all these questions. Which is why I brought up this question of all the other things. Because there are a lot of things in Islam which are gender biased, which are not equal. Islam is not an egalitarian religion. I think a lot of Muslims brought up in the West, because we're brought up with liberalism and we're brought up with Islam, it's very hard for us to understand how do we reconcile the two. And my answer is, we don't have to reconcile the two because liberalism's wrong. It's actually pretty simple. It's actually harder to try and marry Islam to liberalism and reinterpret these verses in a woke way, because I could have said to you, that's metaphorical, and left it there. But that's not telling you the truth. You see? Make sense?
Try reading tafsir. Any verse you don't quite understand fully, find a tafsir you like, and then nowadays so easy, you can go online and look at the tafsir, an explanation of those verses.
Well, I mean, like, that's what you were saying, though, is that sometimes you'll just never understand the wisdom behind it. Which is, like, I guess I have a lot of questions about the wisdom behind some commandments, and, like, I don't, like, this, yeah.
But that's where the tafsir will come in. That what you often find is that some wisdoms are explained. Not everything, some are explained. There are some ahadith that Suboor gave you some ahadith, some context behind it. Right? You'll get some of these explanations through tafsir, the commentary. You see?
For example, when we look at interest, interest may not mean a lot to you perhaps. It does to a lot of Muslim men who are into business, who are into, like, it's a massive constraint economically, especially if you live in the West. You can't get a house on mortgage, you can't get a finance on mortgage, you can't start off a business on mortgage. What is the wisdom behind that? We'll find out on the Day of Judgment. What is the wisdom behind the fact that in Islam, a man is given authority over a woman? Now, nobody can say that Surah Nisa doesn't say that. It does say that. It's the beginning of the verse, that men are the maintainers and protectors of women. It doesn't say they're equal partners. Now, that doesn't mean that one oppresses the other, but it does mean that one has authority over the other. And in Islam, for example, the Khalifa, the head of state, here in the UK, the Prime Minister can be a man, a woman, nowadays anyone in between. But in Islam, the Khalifa has to be a man. All the prophets were men. Now someone can turn around and say, this is wrong, this is patriarchal, this is not in line with 21st century wokeism. And we could say, yeah, that's fine. But what's the evidence that Islam is true? Here's the evidence, therefore we follow it. Look, Islam's not a religion of fashion. Islam's a religion of tradition. It's a religion which dates back hundreds of years, and it's a religion there with a divine origin. So it's not going to fit woke liberal ideologies. If you were brought up in, say, sub-Saharan Africa, this question would not even come to you. The reason why it's come to me and you and us is because we're brought up here in the West. So we have to understand, a lot of the time we're battling opposite ideologies, and we don't need to. We just need to drop the other ideologies and wholeheartedly understand that Islam is the paradigm. It's not a paradigm that needs to match up to others.
Yeah, I mean, I accept that. Yeah. Also, this is just another question. I guess it's not. I don't know if you would want to answer this or if you have time. But you brought up slavery and how like Islam kind of phased it out. But like I'm just wondering if there is any room, like if someone wanted to bring back slavery right now, is Islam okay with? Like, is that okay? Islamic?
So I think it was Bin Baz who was asked this question. Was it Bin Baz or Uthaymeen? One of the scholars was asked about. There was a conflict, and he was being asked about this, and he said no, that's finished. And someone, I'd need someone who has more knowledge on this to verify this. But I remember there was an opinion about a recent conflict in which slaves could have been taken, and the scholar said no. Now let me just explain something very important. There is zero slavery in Islam. Okay, slavery is zero rights. What happened in America when they were the transatlantic slave trade and in Europe, they took these people, they killed them, they butchered them, they raped them, they slaved them, they mutilated them, they gave them no rights. A slave by definition has no rights. Islam doesn't have slavery. Islam has something which is different, which is best to describe as bonded servants. Bonded servants. So I'll explain something. In the Quran it says, if a slave wants their freedom and they want to work towards their freedom, give it to them. That's in the Quran. And in the Quran, and the Prophet told us, treat people justly. The Prophet told us that the slaves should be eating the food that we're eating and they're wearing the clothes that we're wearing. That's not slavery. And also, there was a man that hit a slave. He hit a slave. He felt bad. He went to the Prophet. And the repercussion for hitting the slave was the slave was freed. This is not slavery. Islam has something different to it. And Islam encourages freeing of slaves and the right treatment of these people. So whenever we look at slaves, we think of what happened in the transatlantic slave trade. You cannot compare that to what happened. Do you know the Prophet's uncle Abbas? Right? The Prophet's uncle Abbas. At one point he was a slave and he was freed. So we have to understand slavery in Islam is a term which is used quite loosely. There's slavery in Islam. But I challenge anyone to show there's ever been one slave in Islam. Because a slave by definition has no rights. In the Quran and the Prophet say that slaves have rights. In fact, there's something really interesting. The Prophet forbade Muslims from saying my slave man or my slave girl, because the Prophet said you're all slaves of God. So there's actually authentic narration of the Prophet where he said, do not say my slave girl or my slave boy, right? What's the name of that guy in America who wrote a book on Islam and slavery? That
Islam and slavery.
The revert guy, Jonathan something. Jonathan Brown. There's what's his book called? Basically, Google this book called Jonathan Brown. This book is written about slavery. I haven't read it. I heard it's very good. Just letting you know. But these nuances are really important because no one had this 1400 years ago.
Just another question about that. What is the wisdom, or like what are the parameters around men having intercourse with their female slaves in Islam?
I believe that's covered in the book. I believe that's covered in the book.
Again, a lot of these things were you have to put in a lot of your questions. It really helped trying to understand the context in which Islam came, how the pre-Islamic Arabia was, and the world was really. It put a lot of context. Even with that, Islam put rules down. So hang on a minute, you have to marry the slave, or there are rights to get her pregnant, etc., etc. There are certain things in there. Well, I suppose your wider question would be, why not just outright forbid everything, right? Just make everything haram.
Even I don't think that men had to marry. They could just freely have intercourse.
No, there were rights. There were rights that were given. Before that, there were no rights. You could do what you want. You treat them like absolute property, like cattle. But there were rights given. No, you can't do that. But then there are certain things that are, again, in that context, in that society, in that time, it was very different. But what Islam did was, it didn't just, the whole of slavery, they didn't just abolish it straight away. So, no, it's all haram. That's it. Because they said society would collapse. It would have collapsed on itself. Again, Islamic
collapse if they weren't allowed
Okay,
to have sex with their female slaves.
Let me explain to you how. Okay, let me explain to you how ancient warfare worked. Ancient warfare was all about reproduction. Is battlefield success. So what would happen is two tribes would fight each other. The women from these tribes, all their husbands would be dead. So you wouldn't just leave them, they would be taken by the other tribes and assimilated into that tribe. This was ancient times. Persia, Rome, China, India, everyone was doing the same thing. So what Islam said, it came and regulated that. It regulated that. It didn't ban it. It regulated it. Now someone could turn around today and say, I think the best thing would have been that Muslims just refuse to engage in slavery at all and let the other empires engage in them, and they had greater reproductive success. From a purely sociological perspective, Islam would be at a massive disadvantage on the battlefield. So these things, look, sometimes it's very hard to understand objectively, but in warfare, a lot of the early times, there was no states, there was no borders. Everything in the beginning was the age of empires. It was to do with warfare, and reproduction was one of the fastest ways to replenish your troops, which is why people that could reproduce faster, they actually won greater land, they won greater territory, they had greater empires. It was a different universe. That's why a lot of those things today, when we try and understand them, we cannot understand them because the context has disappeared.
So then that's my question, like if someone wanted to bring it back, like technically, like what in Islam is there that would like prohibit that, you know?
Okay, so in Islam, the Prophet taught us the scholars are the inheritors of the prophets. So for example, I'm not a scholar. If I say something, I have to find it in the Quran, in the sayings of the Prophet, or the consensus of the first three generations of Muslims. That's it. That is Islam. So what we find is that if there's a contemporary problem today, say the war in Bosnia, during this conflict, female slaves could have been taken. But there was an Islamic scholar who's asked, and I think his name was Bin Baz or Uthaymeen, I don't remember which one of those scholars it was. He was asked, are we allowed to take female slaves? And the scholar said no, because that's finished. That was in the past. So to answer your question, can we bring slavery back? Well, according to scholars who are inheritors of the prophets, the answer is no.
You have like councils of scholars, fiqh councils and authors. What in Islam, because it's a living religion, each time society adapts to it. So the scholars who will have inherited, that's what the inheritors of prophets, because they who you turn to for guidance, and who will have the understanding, the full context.
And there'll never be a consensus of Muslim scholars upon falsehood. You can always have one guy randomly saying X, Y, Z, but a consensus of the scholars will never be upon falsehood. Yeah.
Thank you. What were your guys' names?
Suboor.
Suboor Hassan.
Okay. Thank you.
Are you guys from the States?
Yeah, we are.
I just want to, which city are you from?
I'm from Minneapolis.
I find, and I don't mean this in a disrespectful way at all, I've spent a lot of time at Speaker's Corner and I speak to people regularly. British Muslims don't really have these questions as much as American Muslims do. And I just wanted to ask you a question about this. Generally, when I find American Muslims, they are a lot more liberal than the Muslims here. Do you have the same experience?
I mean, I've only been in London for like 2-ish days and I haven't interacted with a lot of Muslims here, but like, so I actually can't answer your question.
No, he's asking about America, United States.
Compared to Muslims in London, like, I don't know, I don't interact with that many Muslims in London, but I don't know.
I think they in the United States, you guys are, in the Muslim community especially, they're in the American society, they're very cleverly linked minorities all onto the democratic side, the left, leaning the liberal side, because they said, these Republicans and the right, and they're all like, it's not us. And therefore, I think maybe because of that, it's a lot of cultural influence on the Muslims.
I also think it's because when you look, for example, here in London, we have Chinatown with Chinese people. We have Golders Green with Jewish people. We have East London with lots of Muslims. I think in America, the Muslims are scattered all over the place. And that weakens the Muslim identity, it weakens the Muslim confidence, it weakens the ability of Muslims to articulate themselves, because this pattern, I've seen it for so many years that I don't believe it's something that has no basis. So I was trying to figure out what is the actual cause. My understanding is because the Muslims in America because America's so big, they don't seem to have a strong community in one area. They all seem to be thinned out in different places.
Yeah, I mean, it could be. I feel like geographically, like Europe is just closer to
The homelands of Islam,
Yeah,
yeah.
so-
Like Morocco is down the corner,
Around the corner, right?
Algeria, Egypt, Libya, Bosnia. Bosnia's in Europe. That could possibly be the case. Yeah.
I'd recommend, you guys are from the United States. There's three scholars in the United States I particularly recommend, especially for you, listening to your questions, that I find the explanations very good. One is Dr. Yasser Qadi. You know Yasser Qadi, right? Have a look at his explanations. He's got a lot of videos online as well. Anything you type in,
Hello, my friend.
in terms of
How you doing?
answers.
You're one of the very few Christians that wears a cross.
Good explanation. Dr. Yasser Qadi.
Are you strong in your faith?
Suleiman, Yaqeen
I like to put it out there.
Huh?
Just learning, just like to put it out there.
I'm Muslim. I respect, having cordial religious dialogues and these things because we live in the same world,
That's what I mean.
What are you, Roman Catholic or
I'm just
Always look at these
English? Okay.
don't want them DNA.
Huh?
I don't want them DNA things. It says
Okay.
sense, so I'll take that as a good.
Were you always religious?
I literally just started this year. I started to get into the dialect of the Bible. I was listening to people talking about the Quran last year.
Listening to who?
Just on YouTube.
Okay.
About the Quran. Just trying to learn everything. So
Good.
that's what I mean. That's why I like it. That's why I'm struggling with a couple of these young boys just shouting and barking like absolute fucking weirdos. That's not dialect.
It's not, and there's a lot of people here like that. There's a bit of a shouting match. What made you turn towards religion if you weren't religious before?
I wouldn't say completely Christian as it is, but what I've had learned of it at the moment. So I've just started from the Old Testament at the moment, just slowly getting from there. So it's not here or there at the moment. It's just literally just learning. So
Sure. What's your name?
that's Lenny.
Lenny. Okay, my name is Suboor. His name is Hassan. So, with the Old Testament,
When you're going to be like such, I'm literally like just at Exeter, so I'm literally starting from scratch.
no worries. So I can give you a few pointers because I've read parts of the Bible. Now, Muslims, we respect the Bible. We don't see it as alien to us because the Quran mentions Jesus and Moses and Abraham and all these prophets. The Quran mentions them and we have a lot of respect for them. We believe that Jesus is not the Son of God. That's where we're different. But when it comes to prophets, when it comes to morals, when it comes to family values, when it comes to the Day of Judgment, when it comes to justice on earth,